I want to thank Professor Whitson for inviting me to speak to the University of California Riverside Leadership Development class, and she asked me to speak today on overcoming adversity. Now, when I think of overcoming adversity, especially in regards to leadership and in business, which is probably what a lot of you are thinking about, kind of think in terms of risk. You know, and there's an adage in business, and it's true. You can't gain anything without risking something. And what I find is adversity a lot of times comes from risk. You know, most people that aren't leaders, try to avoid risk. They try to get through life safe, which is why I think many people end up muddling through life and never really reach their dreams or never really get to a point where they feel like they're living a life filled with passion. But leaders don't do that. Leaders accept risk. Leaders accept adversity. And I think through that comes three qualities that I really want to focus on today, especially as I tell my own story. Three qualities that I believe great leaders have, and they're magnetic. And it's humility, focus, and passion. Now, by humility, I don't mean meek and mild and blah, blah, blah. What I mean by humility is the ability to look in the mirror and admit the truth. You know, as a leader, a lot of times you got a magnetic personality. You're big, you're larger than life. That's okay. You know, but when you're away from the people and you're back at home and you're in the bathroom and you're looking in the mirror, you got to be able to be honest with yourself. And then, of course, there's focus. You know, in the Marine Corps, I flew planes and they teach you to scan your instruments. And being a leader is a lot like that, where any one of those instruments, if something's wrong, it could be life-threatening. But you can only look at one at a time. So you got to be able to very quickly focus from instrument to instrument. Well, being a leader is kind of the same way. You got a lot of data, you got a lot of input, you got a lot of factors and people that you're worried about. And you have to be able, in a split second sometimes, in a moment, focus from one thing to another. And then finally, passion. Passion is the thing that puts it all together. You know, the best leaders people follow. And I believe that it's not a trick you read in a book. It's not saying the right thing. Ultimately, it's passion. People are attracted to passion. Why? Because so few people have it. You know, if some of you end up being the leader of a big company or even a small company, most of the people working for you don't really live their life with a lot of passion, but they're attracted to it. And if you show it and it's part of who you are, you're going to be magnetic. It's easy to talk about those three things, but how do you gain them? Because I can tell you, I did not always have them myself. It took me facing and overcoming adversity. I grew up in rural Indiana, never thought about leadership, never really thought too much about what I was going to do with my life. Like most kids, I just kind of muddled through high school. The back of my mind, one of the things I thought I might want to do when I grew up someday was be a pilot in the Marine Corps. I had some great uncles who had flown in World War II. But it was just one of 10 things. You know, there really wasn't one thing I was super passionate about, I was super focused on. I go to college, I got a scholarship to Vanderbilt University. On my freshman dorm at Vanderbilt, going through that whole, what am I going to do, what am I going to major in kind of thing. And I'm walking down my dorm, and there's an old dorm with cinder block walls. And on one of the walls when you're walking down the dorm was this poster. It was a Marine recruiting poster. And there's a picture of a Marine standing next to an F-18. And I can remember thinking to myself, well, man, what's cooler than that? Being a Marine, flying an F-18. And there was really nothing else on the horizon I wanted to do. So I grabbed that off the dorm wall, and I walked down to the recruiter, and I put it in his face, and I said, I want to be that. What do I do? And like a good recruiter, and I was a recruiter for a while, and yes, they lie. He said, well, let me tell you, son. I can tell you how to do that. And so then that became my focus. And as I went through Vanderbilt, there's some things you got to do to be a Marine officer, and to fly, you got to be a Marine officer. So I went to Officers Candidate School in the summer. When I graduated from Vanderbilt, I got commissioned in the Marine Corps, and there I was in the Marines. And you know, like some of you sitting there today, sometimes you end up in a spot and you're not really sure how you got there. You know, especially when we're younger, we think we're living with passion. We think we're focused on what we want to do. But a lot of times we lack the humility to be honest with ourselves or to be honest with other people. So the truth of the matter is I just kind of ended up there. But being a type A personality, somebody that wants to be the best, I figured, you know what? I'm going to make the most of it. So in the Marine Corps, there's this adage, kind of every Marine's a rifleman. So whether you're enlisted or you're an officer or whatever your job's going to be, you kind of get basic training in being an infantryman, or in my case, an infantry officer. And as an officer, you go to this school called the Basic School. It's about 6 months long. Learn, all the little things you need to know to be a Marine. And part of it are all these physical fitness exercises. And again, I was into being in shape at that time. I always kind of got type of guy that wanted to be number one. And at the end of the class, whoever got the best score on all the physical fitness exercises won an award. And you got to walk on a stage, and a general gave it to you, and you got a trophy. And as I like to tell people, your name is on a trophy forever in Quantico, Virginia, as being the toughest guy, that year. And so I wasn't the fastest guy, and I wasn't the strongest guy, but I was pretty tough, and I wanted to win, and I had a lot of willpower. And so, to keep up, some nights everybody would go hit the rack, and I'd wait about an hour, get up, go run 6 miles, do push-ups and sit-ups. And the result of that was, at the end of that 6 months, I was the first Marine in over 2 years to get a perfect score on every single event. Not only was I blazingly fast running, but I worked out so much I could bench press like 365 pounds. And I could run a mile in about 5.5 minutes. I was in insane shape, okay? My ego was pretty big, but what I didn't have was humility. Another thing I didn't have is I still had just kind of ended up there. I liked doing that, but was I passionate about it? I don't know. I liked being the best. I was passionate about that. But to look at me, you would think my life was really tough and thought out. The truth of the matter was, I just kind of ended up there. Well, after that, went to flight school. And again, kind of like the previous school, you kind of want to be the best. And at that time, out of, say, a flight school class of 30 or 35 Marines, only 1 or 2 got to fly jets. So only 1 or 2 got to be the guy in the poster I saw. I was going to be that guy. So at the end of my flight school class, I graduated number 1. So not only was I the toughest Marine and I had my name on a trophy to prove it, it's there forever, number 1 in my flight school class. So to say I had a big ego would be an understatement. And I had, honestly, a complete lack of humility. Because when I looked in the mirror, I looked at a guy who was the best, who was better than everybody else. And anything that was weak or needed an improvement, I just didn't even think about. If I was really honest, I still didn't know how the hell I ended up there. And what can happen in life, it is adversity and how we face it that can teach us the lessons to move on, to be more than just somebody mulling through life, to be more than just what other people expect you to be more than just somebody in a picture you saw and you think that's what life is about. With me, that started with this horrible jet crash. It was a training mission in Oceana, Virginia. And as we were taking off, the jet caught on fire. We had to eject just a few feet from the ground. Last thing I saw as I'm flying through the air, no one even ever saw my parachute open, we were so low, was my co-pilot go flying by. He ended up dying. I broke my back, I had internal damage, I was bleeding, and in a split second, I went from this invincible Marine, who all I ever worried about was who's going to be number 2 to me. I was lying in an ER, broken, tubes everywhere, my face bruised. In the middle of that, they come and they tell me that the co-pilot had died, and just like that, my life begins to break. I want you to consider something here. People usually just don't break all at once. Like when I give talks on post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or suicide, and you talk about how somebody gets there, it's like we're all born with this shell from the time we're little. And it's that shell, it's that part of our ego that even though the world's a dangerous place, even though police officers get shot and astronauts blow up and Marines get blown up, little kids still dream of being Marines and astronauts and police officers. Why? Because you think that's not going to happen to me, or you think you're tough enough to overcome it. That's not going to be me. And what happens is, as you go out into this world, that shell gets cracks, it gets hits. And we all have them. Every one of you in that room has cracks in your life. Every one of you do. Okay? And sometimes you get enough, or one big enough, that whole shell can crack, it can shatter. And when that happens, it leads to things like depression and suicide and PTSD. Or it just leads to mulling through life. You've got enough cracks and you just want to avoid pain. You want to avoid difficult things. You want to avoid adversity. And so we get in a shell and we go with the flow and we just become, I hate saying it, sheep. You know, go to school, get your major, build your 401k, get equity in your house, retire, die. But life doesn't have to be that way. And what I tell people a lot is adversity can be a gift because it wakes you up. If adversity is bad enough, you can't muddle anymore. Lying in that bed, I wasn't broke yet, but I was on my way. Took some more cracks. You know, my life had to fall apart some more. I was in a lot of pain. I went through about 6 months of therapy when they told me I was ready to go fly again. And even though I was in pain, I was in such good shape I could kind of fight through it. And so when they said go fly, I'm like, okay. So I go to fly again. And on that first check ride, we're like pulling some G's or something, you know, the jet's flipping around, and my spine compresses. And they'd never done an MRI on my back. And they didn't know I had nerve damage. And when my spine compressed, it compressed on some nerves, and I became incontinent. And incontinent, my bladder emptied into my flight suit. And I think the combination of I was in excruciating pain from the nerves, screaming out loud pain. My bladder emptied. I lost control of my body. And I think all that contributed to, I had a flashback. It was the first time I was in a jet since the accident. I'm in excruciating pain when I didn't expect it. My bladder's emptied into my flight suit. And it's like that jet's on fire. And you hear about flashbacks in movies, and you think of the old Vietnam vet or whatever and the flashbacks. But let me tell you, man, it is as real as you sitting there in that room as me being here on this video. And that's what's so scary about it. A lot of times you go through a traumatic event, it's over before you know what happened. You're in shock. When you have a flashback, something's reoccurring that you know. So it's insanely frightening because you know what's happening. You see it happening. It doesn't just fly by. And if there hadn't been somebody with me on that flight giving me a check ride, I'd be dead. And then that's when my life really started to fall apart. I was in a relationship, it fell apart. I quit talking to my family. I quit going to church because I was in all this pain and I was worried whether I was going to fly again. As I was in all this pain, I had a flight surgeon who thought he was doing me a favor, and he gave me open scripts to Percocet, Vicodin, and Zoloft. So I literally had a bedside table of probably 50 pill bottles from multiple pharmacies, one from the base, one from this pharmacy. Of course, how'd that make me feel? A loser. What kind of Marine does that? A weak loser Marine. That's what I told myself. So I didn't tell anybody, which made me more crazier, which made me more depressed. And as I got more depressed, I didn't work out. And as I didn't work out, I got in more pain. As I got in more pain, I justified taking the pills. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to escape. Remember that shell I told you about? We all get cracks, and sometimes you get enough, it just breaks. Well, ultimately, leadership pushed me over the edge. When you're a leader, never underestimate the weight of your words. Ever. Never. When somebody comes to you and you don't know what's going on in their life, why they're talking to you, don't ever underestimate the weight of your words. With me, it was two. The first was an Air Force psychiatrist. After this happened in the jet, they sent me to Wilford Hall Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, specialized in flight injuries. And they were doing all these tests on me to find out what was wrong with my nerves and blah, 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 blah. And as part of these tests, they sent me to see this psychiatrist. And I remember walking in there, and I report to him, and I'm standing at ease with my hands behind my back like that. And then he just starts talking, asking me questions. And I'm expected to sit down on a couch or something, and I'm just standing there answering questions. And he talks to me for probably 45 minutes. And he gets done, doesn't say anything, doesn't give me a diagnosis, nothing. He writes in my medical record, he folds it up, he hands it to me. And because I was at a Air Force base, I had to get the medical record to a flight surgeon who was at a Navy base, and where I had to take it for whatever reason was in Corpus Christi, which is hours from San Antonio. So I'm driving down there, bringing my medical record, and like any of you would have done, I'm like, man, I wonder what that shrink said about me. And as I'm driving along, I open up my medical record, which I still have to this day at my home in a box. And on the cover sheet, it says, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, will probably kill himself in 90 days. And I'm like, whoa. And I had 3 thoughts. And my first thought was, post-traumatic stress disorder. Isn't that what those crazy Vietnam vets get? And the second thought was kill myself. I knew I was going to kill myself. And my third thought, and the only thought that mattered, was they're not going to let me be a Marine. When they see that and they realize what a crazy lunatic I am, there is no way they're going to let me be a Marine. And that is all I focused on. And then the second leadership person that kicked me in the butt and pushed me over the edge, a couple days later, my CO gets that, and I got to go fly where he is. And I walk into his office, and he's like this crusty Marine major dude, prior enlisted, older guy. And I don't even get to at ease. I would come in and report, I'm standing at attention, the door shuts, he grabs that medical record, he starts screaming at me, what the hell is this, and what did you tell them, and you know how this is going to make me look, and post-traumatic stress disorder, when, this, and when, you're going to kill yourself, when. He must have said when like 15 times. And at some point, he's in my face, maybe 2 inches from my nose, and he's screaming at me. To the point spit is coming out of his mouth, and he's spitting on me. And he walks back to go sit down at his desk, and I can remember looking down at my boots, and there's spit on them. And the scary thing was, all I thought to myself was, he's right. I'm a loser. I'm pathetic. I don't deserve to be a Marine. And that night was the first night I wanted to kill myself. And I had this gun collection, and I think I picked it just because it looked mean and shiny. But one of them was a Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum, 7-shot revolver, 6-inch barrel, handgun, custom grips, custom trigger. And I put that sucker to my head. And I didn't pull the trigger just because I didn't pull the trigger. I really had no reason not to. And I slept with that gun in my head every night for about 3 months. And a couple days later, after that night with the gun and meeting my CO, I got word they were going to disability discharge me from the Marine Corps. Too expensive to fix me, so they were getting rid of me. And went through like this 6-month process of being med boarded where I went crazy. Because they kept me in San Antonio where there were no Marines around really. I didn't have to report. When I went to the hospital, they didn't care what I looked like. So I got more depressed. As I got more depressed, I took more pills. As I got more pills, I got more depressed, and I didn't work out, and I got in more pain. And it got to where my day was like getting up in the morning whenever I'd wake up, go to the corner gas station, get beef jerky and Mountain Dew, come back, take my pills, pop them, feel like I was floating in bed. And that's just what I did every day. And I was hallucinating and I was seeing things, and it got so bad I had a scab on the side of my head that I'd scraped off with the barrel of the gun. So I would go to bed with this scab with the gun to my head. And in doing so, the scab would get scraped off and it would bleed, and I would wake up with my head stuck to my pillow every day. And I'd be dead if it wasn't for one person who's the last person I thought could help me. And this gets to humility, the first step to being a great leader. We got big egos. A lot of you might look at your professor and go, what the hell does she know about leadership? She's sitting here teaching at a college. Some of you might look at me and go, man, you're 20 years older than me. Life's different today. What do you know? But guess what? It's not just me and your professor and your mom and your dad. It's each other too. Do you really listen to each other? Do you really get honest with each other? You know what Facebook and Instagram is? It's telling people what you want them to believe about you in general. We're not very transparent and humble with each other. And that's where I was then. Because even though I was broken, man, if you weren't a Marine, you weren't shit. And if you weren't as tough as me, what the hell did you know about life? And if you hadn't been through what I'd been through, get out of my face, man. That's where my head was. But thank God somebody who cared about me, was a new psychiatrist at that hospital. They saw my medical record, wanted to see the crazy guy running around the hospital. She asked me in. I'm still looking the part of Marine. I'm not doing anything. She leaves a message, can she see me? I'm like, sure. So I show up at the hospital and I walk in, and I kid you not, it was like probably the last person I would ever think that could help me, especially in that military environment. Because it's an Air Force psychiatrist right out of med school, where they go to med school, they're psychiatrists, they go to a 2-week class to put their uniform on, make them a major, and boom, go get them. So I walk in, and it's this 35 or so year old woman, which at the time seemed really old to me, and she's not really in shape, doesn't really work out, doesn't PT, not the most attractive person, uniform's not straight. I'm a Marine. You get a millimeter ruler out and are doing this kind of stuff. And I can remember looking at her thinking, what the hell do you know about being a Marine, and how are you going to help me? Now, the funny thing is, a couple years ago, I wrote an article in the Washington Post about PTSD and stigma and things like that, and I mentioned her. And then about a year later, as we all do, she's Googling her name, and she finds the article, and she sent me a really nice message, but part of it was, yep, that was the look in your face. I remember it. And I was like one of the first people she'd ever dealt with as a psychiatrist in the military. But thank God she helped me discover something about myself that saved my life, which is I'd been muddling along. I was lost because I didn't know where to go. I had no purpose. I had no passion. I had no identity. I just ended up where I was. And when I got taken away from me, I felt like a nobody. And slowly I began to recognize that the way to overcome the adversity I'd been through was to find out what it was I was passionate about and who I was supposed to become and where I was supposed to go. And it didn't happen overnight. It was step by step. When the light really clicked is we were talking one day. And I remember when I was a little kid growing up in Indiana, and I was about 8, and I had a diary I wrote in. And we lived in the middle of the country, and I thought it was a normal thing for a little boy to do. But one night my parents had a couple come babysit me and my 2 brothers that I'd never met before. And when I get my diary out to write in it before going to bed, they start making fun of me. Now, it probably wasn't as bad as I remember, but it was like girls writing diaries, and are you a sissy? And I ended up crying and shutting that diary and putting it up, and I never wrote it in it again. And I remember in talking to my doctor, just the panic I felt of that the only thing keeping me alive at that time, I think, was the fact I still had that identity of being a Marine. But that was soon to be taken away. I was soon to be disability discharged, to get that DD-214 and walk out the front gates and not be able to turn around and come back. And I was scared to death of who I was and where I was going to go and what I was going to be. And I remember her saying to me, well, maybe that little boy's got some answers for you, which I kind of thought was silly at first. But, a couple of nights later, I can't sleep. I got insomnia. It's like 3 in the morning. I'm in a coffee shop, drinking coffee, smoking. And it was like this storm broke out. It wasn't a hallucination. I think it was the drugs and the lack of sleep. But it was like this storm broke out in the coffee shop. And I can remember thinking to myself, man, I could go crazy right now, or I could do something with this. And I'm like, what do I do with it? And then I thought about the little kid in Dr. Lanzano, and I asked the waitress for a piece of paper and a pencil. And I wrote this poem. Came out just like this. Took a storm to crack the mortar, the stone the aged clay, the walls I built to shield myself from rains I feared to face. Took a storm to clear the rubble, the remnants of my home, to find the lost foundation poured before I dwelt alone. And today, I think I'll swim. What that meant to me was I was at a point in my life, I had a choice. And if you go through extreme adversity in life, you're going to come to this choice. Where I could either let everything that I had lost, everything that had crashed around me, carry me away, or I could realize I had nothing to lose to build my life up. When you've lost everything, what do you got to lose? To follow a dream, to build your life up any way you want. Not to get preachy here, but that's why I always tell people that to me, prayer is when you're on your knees with your mouth shut listening. And that's life. It's when you've been broke and you realize that muddling through life, trying to be safe, doing what other people expect, eventually doesn't work. Okay? And we've got that choice. Now, what did that mean to me at that time? Because I still wasn't sure what I was passionate about and what I wanted to do. I'd always wanted to play the guitar, so I bought a guitar. That's why at all my performances for people, I play guitar. Okay? And I started playing a guitar. Now, I still had a gun in my head, and I was still popping pills. But that was that one thing that I cared about, that I was passionate about, that got me up and I could go do. Another thing I'd always wanted to do is ride a motorcycle. I never had one. So I remember it was about a month or two before I was going to get disability discharged, found a flight surgeon to buy my pride and joy. It was a red Porsche Turbo. He paid me cash for the car. I met him at a motorcycle shop to do the transaction. I walk in the motorcycle shop with cash. I buy a motorcycle and spend the next 2 months figuring out how to ride this thing. So the day that I got disability discharged, that at one point I thought about with terror, about where I was going to go, what was going to happen to me, and what I was going to become. Man, I showed up to get my DD-214, which is the paperwork you need when you get disability discharge or discharge in general from the military. Had a backpack and a motorcycle, and that was it. And I picked that up and I took off. And I rode on that motorcycle for 2 years. And that is what it took for me to find out what I was going to do with my life and what I was going to be passionate about. And everything I do today came from that trip. My wife, who I met then, and now we've got 7 kids, figuring out that what I wanted to do was help people who've gone through things like me, help people that have been in dark places. But if I hadn't been willing to take that first step, I would have never done it. If I would have went home, I probably would have just entered the stream. And I wouldn't have been a leader. I would have just looked for a job and I would have existed. And I never made the choice, I'm going to be a leader. Ever. But I'm telling you, when you've been brought to your knees and you look in the mirror and you're honest with yourself and who you are, when you discover something that you're passionate about and you care about, and you have the focus to do it well, people will follow you. And I don't care what you do, because you think of a leader as like you got to be the CEO of a corporation. That's a position. He might or might not be a leader. A leader is what you do every day. A leader could be in the class. You could be a leader in your group, doing your project for Professor Whitson. You could be a leader at home. You could be a leader in your organization. Leaders are people that others follow them. They're not someone that gets a title and you're a leader. That's not how it works. So as I was going through this motorcycle trip and I was beginning to figure out what I wanted to do, afterwards I did a lot of different jobs. I lived in San Francisco for a while, published a magazine that was successful, failed. Another episode of adversity we could talk about some other time. But I had more failures. But I was able to pick myself up because I was getting more and more resilient, because I was getting more and more honest with myself, okay? Because I was realizing that it was important to fight through these and to keep fighting through these adversities. And then, like happens a lot of times in life, the thing that I've been doing the last 10 years, I just stumbled into by accident. You know, I had sort of written a book and I had some music about overcoming my trauma, overcoming my adversity, and I was wanting to give back. And it's after 9/11, and I thought I wanted to give back to just soldiers, but there's no big military base in Indiana where I live, and I was having a hard time working with the military, and I had a friend who worked in prisons, and this priest, and they suggested I start go and talk to guys in prisons, and I'm thinking, dude, I've never been in a prison. You know, it's that ego of us. Well, what do you know about me? You're in Indiana. What do you know about, Southern California or whatever? And I'm like, I've never been arrested. I've never been in jail. 2/3 of the guys in that jail I'm going to go talk to are different ethnic backgrounds than mine, different economic backgrounds from mine. They don't want to hear from me. And they're like, no, broke is broke, go. So I go, and no kidding, the first time that I ever spoke to a group, played my guitar for anybody, was in a room with 200 prisoners, all of whom had served long sentences, were 6 months from getting out. First time I ever did it. And when I got done, about 80 of those 200 came up to me. They just wanted to talk. They wanted to shake my hand. They wanted to ask me questions, and they asked me back. And I went back there every week for 6 months. And that became, which some of you might have, if you looked online or looked me up before the talk, that became my program I have called the Ladder Up, okay? Which helps people sort of unlock that black box that we put ourselves in. Whether you're a father or a Marine, you know, or an addict or whatever. We all get in that black box. How do you get out? That's what the Ladder Up does. And that's where it started, in that prison, and it was by accident. And I was happy to be volunteering in that prison till one day a man serving a life sentence for double murder came up to me after one class. And if any of y'all have ever spent time in a prison or know someone there or volunteered there, you know the one thing you never want to be asked in a prison is to do a favor for somebody, because that usually leads to bad things. And this guy's about 6'5", 260 pounds. He walks up to me and he's like, "Hey, Silouan, man, need you to do me a favor?" And I'm like, "What kind of favor, bro?" And he's like, No, not that kind of favor. He's like, "It's my boy, Billy." And he just got a note from his boy, Billy, who had just gotten out of the Marines. And he said, "Man, he's not doing so good." And he was in this battle called Fallujah. And I'm worried about him, and I can't call him. Can you help him? And it's one of those moments that like changes your life. And again, I believe if I did not have the humility and the passion about what I was doing and the focus to feel confident I could help someone, I wouldn't have made this call, and my life would be different. But driving home, I go, this is what I'm supposed to do. It's not always smart to call some gang member's family. And actually, this kid lived in California, not far from y'all. And I call him, and he's smart, really smart. Turns out he fought with the Marines, but he was a medic with the Navy. And he was 3 months from having been out. And he was in a room with all the windows drawn, with a gun in a corner. A couple weeks earlier, he'd woken up in the middle of the night, thought he was in Iraq, saw a shadow moving, beat it up. His girlfriend put her in the ER. Thank God she didn't press charges, but she said, "You got a restraining order. You got a couple of weeks to get out. I'll go stay with my parents, find a place." He's 3 days from the sheriff's coming to pull him out. He's got nowhere to go. He doesn't have a job. He's so scared and hypervigilant because he can't get over what happened in Iraq. He's in the corner. And then at one point, I asked him, I said, "How'd you get there, man?" He tells me. You know, we see things like war, but really anything. We hear about other people being broke, and it becomes a headline to us. Just becomes a headline. You know, forget about war, anything like that. And we want to get these goggles on and just focus on what's in front of us. And I think that separates us. It makes it harder for us to be transparent. It makes it harder for us to be leaders if we don't really consider what's being done to people and what they're going through. And I ask him that, and he tells me about Fallujah, which is a battle. If any of y'all probably are younger, you probably got some friends that might have served, and if they say Fallujah, that was bad. Fallujah was one of the few battles since 9/11 we fought totally old school, meaning we dropped in. There was 2 battles of Fallujah, and there was 2 because the first was so bloody. We pulled out to go back in a less bloody way. And we dropped in flyers and said, "Get out. We're going to come in 3 days. If you're there, you're the enemy." That's what we did. And this young man I'm talking to is with a group of Marines, and they're going house to house. And imagine parts of Fallujah fairly modern, you know, homes, some of them that look similar to ours, and paved streets for part of it. And they're going in, and the way a Marine clears a house, kicks in the door, actually throws in a grenade, it goes boom, you kick in a door, you rush in, you shoot all the bad guys, you secure it, you go to the next house. What's that mean? It means people are getting shot. And this kid describes me going into these homes and people blown apart, and Marines dying, and women and children caught in the crossfire and blown apart. Blood everywhere, people burning. Now imagine the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Just take a minute. I'm going to count to 10. Okay, it's not quite 10, but hopefully you have the worst thing you can imagine in your mind. Imagine that happening to you over and over and over and over and over again for 18 hours. Imagine your friend dying in your arm over and over and over. Imagine people blown apart over and over and over. Imagine smelling burning flesh over and over and over. Until a point, he comes to this house. And the worst part for a medic is you got to make decisions like this in a split second. Help me! oh, I can help you. And in your mind, you're going, I can't help you. You're going to die. I'm going to give you morphine and you're going to die. And the other guy is screaming in pain, but he's going to be okay. So we'll just scream in pain for a second. And then the third guy you can help and you give him your attention. And you're having to make decisions like that over and over as you're seeing all these things. And so after a day like this, and he's covered in blood, he goes to this house, and there's a Marine yelling for him, and he needs help, and he runs in, and as he runs in, he sees this Marine yelling for help, cut in half, and he's gonna die. And there's nothing he can do for him. And as he sees that, and he processes what he can and can't do, and what's gonna happen to this young kid, there is so much blood on the floor from this kid's, all his blood pouring out, and other people in the room, he slips. And he falls back into this pool of blood. And as he put it, every part of my body that wasn't covered in blood was. And I was covered in blood from the tips of my toes to the top of my head. And he said, I just curled up in a ball and I started crying for my mom. And then on the phone with me, I could hear him going, Mommy, Mommy. And I'm sitting there going, what do I tell this guy? I don't think I've ever felt so inadequate in my life. I'm like, what door did I open up? And then he said something that set me on this path. He looked on the phone, he says, man, you're the first person who's called me in 3 months. I can't tell you how much that means to me. Nobody from the Marines, nobody from the Navy, nobody from the VA, nobody. You're the first person that called me. And I can remember in that moment, remembering what it was like for me to be in that black room. And what it was like for him, and how many other people must feel the same way. And I said, I'm going to do something about it. And I've spent the last 10 years of my life doing something about it. And the reason people like Professor Whitson hears me on the radio and asks me to do this talk, the reason I've been to military bases all over the country, the reason I got people at churches that want to do groups with this, the reason I've survived. You know why? You know why people follow my lead? Because they know I'm the real deal. Why? Because of the humility to be honest with myself. Okay? Because I am passionate about this. Every day I get up, everything I do, doing this video for you, in my mind, I'm doing it to try to save somebody's life. Maybe one of you sitting there today. Maybe a friend that you know. And 3, I am focused. Life could get so distracting. You got to stay focused. You have to. It's hard to do. But you got to be focused. And you got to have, and part of focus is understanding that the little steps we take are going to lead to big things. And that being a leader means learning to be a leader. And how you approach your class and your project does influence the kind of leader and the kind of person that you are going to be down the road. Because you don't just flip a switch. People that muddle through life and are sheep think they're going to flip the switch someday, and they never do. You got to flip the switch right now. So, I'm out in San Francisco working on this magazine, and I had this friend, Carlos Sarao. You can look him up. I think Sarao is spelled like Sarrao or something. And he was just another wannabe photographer. But he was doing it. He was passionate about it. And I felt like I was working with this huge professional, even though I was paying him a couple $100 and half of what he did for free. And I remember one day we were driving down towards, where were we going? Half Moon Bay. We're going just south of Half Moon Bay. And I'm asking him, I go, what's the difference between people that make it and become these big famous photographers and ones that don't? And he said a profound thing to me. He says, well, first of all, you got all these people that say they want to do it, but they never do it. But then what most people do is they want to step their foot in and work their way up the ladder, and they become like assistants for people and blah, blah, blah. But they never make it. He goes, what I've always found, the people that make it is that they realize that when you decide to be a photographer, that's who you are right then. And from the day I started, I try to take every shoot, every project like I was getting paid $1 million. Because this is who I am and this is what I do. That is the kind of thing that motivates people. That's the kind of thing that this guy that I felt like was doing me a favor, we're driving down there and I feel like we're doing $1 million photo shoot. Why? 1, because he's a good, humble guy, willing to talk to me, answer any question I had. 2, he was focused. we were talking about what we were going to do on the shoot, and he was prepared, and he had everything down to the last little iota of things that could go wrong and what he would do, and he was passionate about it, and I was passionate about it. Today, he is a Hasselblad honored photographer. You know, he probably gets paid $100,000 a day on high-end advertising shoots. Just look him up. I mean, you'll be blown away who this guy is. That's a leader. Now, he's a photographer. He's not the CEO of a corporation, but I promise you that guy has influenced countless lives. And that was just one thing back then, especially because part of what I do is creative. You know, don't wait to be something. You know, there's also a great documentary, if any of y'all like Pink Floyd. There's a Pink Floyd documentary on the making of Dark Side of the Moon. And Roger Waters is being interviewed, and it's a great interview, especially if you're young, because he talked about how what influenced a lot of his music was this attitude growing up in England that you really weren't a person until you were respectable in the world with a job. That as a kid, you really weren't living yet. And as a college student, you really weren't living yet. You know, and who you were wasn't determined until you were 30. And he's like, that's crap. He's like, I knew at 16 that what I was doing today was just as important as what I was going to do when I was 30. That's how you live. That attracts people. It becomes urgent. So I want you to think about something today. And this is very important. I promise you, there's somebody sitting in that room right now who's broken and is suffering with something. And I promise you, everyone in that room has got cracks. And the world today has gotten so much about look at me and look at fluff and look at sheen and look at what I'm supposed to be, that we don't talk about those things with one another, that we don't reach out to one another, that we don't truly connect and care about one another. And you can't do it if you don't have the humility to look in the mirror at yourself. And if you want to be somebody who is magnetic, okay, if you want to be somebody who other people follow, you got to learn to do that. And you know how you learn? By, instead of running from adversity, you face it. Instead of avoiding getting broken down and put to your knees, you embrace it. Instead of being scared at failing, you understand that when you fail is often when you're going to learn the most. And then the most important part of all of that is sharing it with people. I don't know any of you. I promise you there are people in this room right now who are riveted to what I'm saying. And you know why? Not because I'm the best speaker in the world. It's definitely not because I'm the best looking guy in the world. You know, it's because I've been honest with you. I've been transparent with you. I've told you about the pills on my table and what I had to do to fight through them. I told you what I love doing. I've told you what I'm passionate about. You see it in my eyes. Now, you're not going to always connect with everyone, okay? And not everyone is always going to follow you, but you don't have to. You know, you just need enough to sort of get the job done. So I would challenge you guys today. Some of you are there, you know. If you've been through a lot and you've used it as an opportunity to look at yourself and make yourself a better person, and you've used that as a reason to go, what do I got to lose to live my dreams and to do what I want? And you're focused on it, God bless you. And hopefully today this will encourage you and you'll stay the course. And you're going to be the kind of person that whatever your world is, whether it's a world of your family or a world of a big corporation or a world of a whole bunch of people, you are going to impact people. Or maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you've been muddling. Maybe you're sitting there in class wondering, how the hell did I get here? Why am I at UC Riverside? What am I doing when I'm leaving? Don't keep living like that. Don't be afraid to face tough issues. Don't be afraid to dream. Don't worry about what other people think. Worry about, am I humble? Can I look in the mirror? Can I take criticism? Can I take what my professor says? Can I take what my friends say? Can I learn from it? Can I look in the mirror at night? If I'm suffering, can I go get help? Whatever it is. 2, what are you passionate about? Nothing, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And sometimes it starts. I just didn't get to what I do today overnight. It started with a guitar, a motorcycle, a trip, a magazine. It all led to this with many failures on the way. Little dreams are good. Pick up that guitar you've always wanted to pick up. Go on that trip you've always wanted to go on. That will lead to things. And then finally, be focused. Take every opportunity, every hard class, every bit of adversity as an opportunity to learn the skills to be focused and to get the job done and to do it well. And if you have those three qualities, you're a leader no matter what your title is on the door. So thank you. It is awesome to do this video. Probably when I see it, I'm going to want to do it again. But God bless you all. Thank you, Professor Whitson. Hope to see you guys someday. And if you ever guys want to learn more about me or get in touch with me, please check out my website at silouan.com, silouan.com. Peace.
Dark rooms and battered dreams, pretty girls, just memories. Remember when I thought that I would be someone? The rains came crashing in on me, looking around but I can't see, I can't feel anything, there is no hope for me.